Elizabeth Johnson walked through the gleaming glass doors of the dealership with a kind of excitement that made her feel like a little girl again. The towering white ceilings, the polished floors, the pristine luxury vehicles glinting under show lights. It was a place that smelled of wealth and power, and yet, as she stepped in, the air around her began to chill. She felt it before she saw it. The glances, the side eyes, the smirks that never quite formed into smiles. They looked at her and didn't see a customer. They saw a woman who didn't belong. She was dressed simply. A beige cardigan, sturdy walking shoes, and a worn leather bag slung over one shoulder. Her grey curls were tied back with precision. She carried herself with grace, but none of that seemed to matter here. She was 68, African-American, and unassuming. Not the image they were conditioned to associate with money, certainly not the image they thought deserved respect. Tom spotted her first. Mid-40s, full of swagger, sales manager with the kind of ego that wore a Rolex louder than any voice. He sauntered over with a crooked smirk, stopping just short of blocking her path. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice smooth but heavy with condescension. Not curiosity, not kindness, just suspicion wrapped in a suit. Elizabeth nodded, offering a warm smile. "I'd like to see the new S-Class. I've heard wonderful things about it." Tom paused for a beat, then tilted his head toward the general manager behind the glass-walled office. Rick looked up from his phone, raised an eyebrow, and gave the slightest shake of his head. Tom chuckled as if he were in on a private joke. "That's a very expensive car," he said slowly, like she might not understand. "Are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable at our used lot? We've got some great options there, real bargains." Elizabeth didn't flinch. She had dealt with this kind of treatment before. You don't build a tech company from scratch in a world that underestimates you unless you learn how to wear dignity like armor. "I'm sure," she said simply. Tom's smile thinned. "Ma'am, let's not waste each other's time. That car costs 6 figures. Maybe you should—" "I know what it costs," she said, cutting him off gently. "I'd still like to see it." Rick emerged from his office, irritation etched across his face like a mask. "We have real customers to attend to," he snapped. "Security will escort you out." There it was. No apology, no pretense, just a decision to discard her, to reject her presence outright. Elizabeth's eyes never dropped. She didn't beg. She didn't argue. She turned slowly, walked out with grace and composure, though inside her chest ached with the familiar sting of being underestimated. Outside, the wind caught the hem of her cardigan, but she didn't bother to fix it. Her fingers reached for her phone, the smooth glass screen lighting up with a single touch. She scrolled to the contact labeled simply James M&A Legal and pressed call. The voice on the other end answered in seconds. "James," she said, her voice steady, "I want to buy a car dealership." That night, the dealership was quiet, unaware of the storm that had just been set in motion. The same floors gleamed, the same cars sat proudly in their glass enclosures, and the same men prepared to go home, completely unaware that the woman they had shooed away was on a call with lawyers and advisors, people who didn't look twice at her clothes because they knew what lay behind her calm gaze. Power, intelligence, and wealth built from innovation. Elizabeth didn't sleep much that night. She reviewed documents, she asked questions, she planned. This wasn't about revenge, it was about principle, about showing them, and others watching, that assumptions are a luxury no one can afford. 3 weeks later, the dealership staff stood assembled in the conference room, summoned for a surprise announcement. Rick sat with his arms crossed. Tom leaned against a wall chewing gum. The regional representative from the parent company cleared his throat and straightened his tie. "I'm here to inform you of a change in ownership," he began, eyes scanning the room. "The dealership has been acquired by a private investor." Rick scoffed under his breath. Probably some big auto chain looking to clean house. The representative continued. "The new owner will be arriving shortly to introduce herself." The room murmured. "A woman?" Rick shifted uncomfortably. Tom looked confused. And then the doors opened. Elizabeth Johnson stepped inside, wearing a crisp navy blue suit and polished heels. Her presence turned the air electric. She walked to the front of the room with the quiet command of someone who had led boardrooms and brokered deals 10 times this size. She stood there, letting the silence hang. Recognition dawned slowly across the room. Tom's mouth parted. Rick's hands dropped from their defensive fold. No one spoke. "I believe we've met," Elizabeth said finally, her voice soft but resonant. No one answered. "I was here 3 weeks ago," she continued, "and I was told I didn't belong, that I couldn't afford to be here, that I should try the used lot." Still silence. "I bought this place because I believe in accountability. I believe in treating people with dignity, regardless of how they dress, how they look, or how they walk through your doors." The staff shifted uneasily. Some looked away. Others stared at her like she was someone entirely new. "But let me be clear," she went on. "This isn't about punishment. It's about opportunity. I will be reviewing every staff member's performance. Those who meet the standard of respect and professionalism I expect will stay. Those who don't, won't." She paused, letting her words settle like dust. "And for those of you wondering, yes, I did buy that S-Class from another dealership." That moment, seared in silence, marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. In the weeks that followed, the dealership underwent a transformation. Elizabeth brought in new management who understood both the brand and the value of humanity. The customer base expanded. Word spread fast. A luxury dealership run by a visionary who didn't tolerate bias, who built systems based on merit and respect. The same showroom that had once dismissed her became a symbol of her triumph. The same floor she was walked off now bore her signature on every memo, every policy, every innovation. And Tom, he was let go within a week after a series of complaints surfaced about his conduct with other customers. Rick tried to negotiate, even offered to mentor under her leadership, but Elizabeth had already seen all she needed. He was replaced with a woman of color, a sharp manager who had been overlooked in the industry for far too long. Elizabeth didn't need the dealership. She didn't need the S-Class. What she needed, what she had always needed, was a world that judged her for her brilliance, not her appearance. And when the world failed to provide that, she built it herself. Years later, a young woman walked into that same dealership, nervous, unsure, wearing hand-me-down shoes and holding a dog-eared folder filled with resumes. She was greeted with a smile, offered water, treated like she mattered. Elizabeth watched from her office upstairs, eyes soft with memory. The world didn't change in a day, but sometimes all it took was one woman walking out the door with her head held high, and walking back in owning everything that once tried to shut her out. Back inside the dealership, the world spun on as if nothing had changed. Tom leaned against the counter, laughing with the kind of arrogance that came easy to a man who had never been challenged. Rick stood nearby, sipping coffee, shaking his head with mock disbelief. "Did you see her face?" Tom jeered, his voice dripping with ridicule. "She really thought she could buy one of these cars." Rick smirked. "The nerve. Walking in here like she belonged. Some people just don't get it." Their laughter echoed through the lobby like an ugly stain on an otherwise spotless showroom. The glass walls reflected back the polished illusion of professionalism, but behind those reflections, the truth twisted beneath the surface. Martha sat at her desk a few feet away, eyes fixed on her computer screen though she wasn't reading a word. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, stiff, unmoving. Inside her chest, guilt churned like a storm. She had seen what happened. She had watched Elizabeth get humiliated, listened to the cruel dismissal, and did nothing. Not because she agreed, but because she was afraid. Afraid that speaking up would cost her job. Afraid that, like Elizabeth, she too would be cast aside without a second thought. The phone on Rick's desk rang sharply, cutting through the laughter like a blade. He rolled his eyes and answered, still grinning. "This is Rick." There was a long pause. As the voice on the other end continued, his expression changed. The color drained from his face. His mouth tightened. "What do you mean she's a major shareholder?" he said, barely above a whisper. Tom stopped laughing. "Wait, what did you just say?" Rick held up a hand, eyes wide, his forehead dampened with sudden sweat. Yes, of course, I understand. Yes, sir. He ended the call and stood frozen, the weight of the moment crashing over him like a tidal wave. Tom stepped forward, his voice less confident now. What's going on? Before Rick could respond, the sound of the dealership's front doors swinging open snapped their attention forward. The room turned, and there she was. Elizabeth Johnson. She walked in, not as the woman they dismissed, not as the customer they laughed at, but as a force they never saw coming. She was flanked by 2 board members from the corporate office and her personal attorney. A poised man in a tailored suit carrying a leather-bound folder. Her heels clicked softly against the tile floor, each step deliberate, unwavering. The silence was deafening. Rick was the first to move, stumbling forward with a nervous smile pasted across his face. His voice, once commanding, now trembled with false warmth. Mrs. Johnson, what an unexpected pleasure. Please allow me to personally assist you. She raised a hand. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't loud, but it stopped him cold. The simple gesture was enough to drain the last of the authority from his voice. He stepped back, confused, disoriented. There's no need, Elizabeth said, her voice calm, deliberate. The board and I have already discussed your assistance. Rick blinked. Discussed? Before he could finish, one of the board members stepped forward, his face expressionless, tone cool and official. Effective immediately, he said. You're both terminated. Your behavior today was unacceptable. This company does not tolerate discrimination, disrespect, or failure to uphold the core values of our brand. The words hit the room like a lightning strike. Tom's legs wobbled. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You can't do this, he stammered. I've worked here for years. I was top salesman last quarter. The board member didn't flinch. That may be true, but it doesn't excuse what happened today. Rick turned to Elizabeth, desperate now. Please, let's not overreact. We made a mistake, but surely there's a way to fix this. I'll apologize. I'll offer a discount, whatever you need. Elizabeth looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. You didn't make a mistake, she said softly. You made a choice, and now I've made mine. She turned away from him without another word. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Martha, who still sat at her desk, hands trembling, eyes wide. Everyone else had been watching the drama unfold like spectators at a match. But Martha had been watching with something else, regret, empathy, hope. Elizabeth approached slowly, stopping just a few feet away. Martha, she said gently. Martha stood, unsure of what to say. You're now interim manager. Martha gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Me? But I didn't say anything. I should have stopped them. I should have done more. Elizabeth nodded. You wanted to. I saw it in your eyes. You have integrity, Martha. That's what this place needs. Tears welled in Martha's eyes, unbidden and unfiltered. Thank you. I won't let you down. Elizabeth smiled, small and warm. I know. The rest of the staff remained silent, some stunned, others exchanging uncertain glances. The shift in the room was unmistakable. The rules had changed. The power had shifted. The story they thought they were part of had been rewritten right in front of them. Over the next several days, the dealership was a whirlwind of change. The corporate team remained on site, auditing systems, reviewing staff behavior, updating policies. Employees who had grown too comfortable in their bias were called out. Those who had operated in the shadows of prejudice found themselves exposed. And yet, amid the tension, there was something else: hope. Elizabeth didn't seek revenge. She didn't scream or punish. She led with the same quiet dignity she had carried when she first walked in. She spent time talking to the janitor, asking about his schedule. She met with the receptionist, asking how long she'd been with the company. She took Martha under her wing, mentoring her, guiding her through the transition from overlooked employee to respected leader. Tom never returned to the dealership. He was escorted out that day, unable to face the consequences of his own arrogance. Rick tried to appeal his termination, but corporate stood firm. His reputation was now tied to the viral story making rounds in executive circles, how a dealership had insulted one of its wealthiest stakeholders and lost everything in 5 minutes. The customers noticed the change too. Word spread quickly. Elizabeth didn't need to advertise. People came to the dealership simply to meet the woman who had turned humiliation into transformation. They came because they believed in her, in what she stood for, and she delivered. Under her guidance, sales increased. Employee satisfaction improved. New hires brought diversity and innovation. The culture shifted from toxic exclusivity to empowered professionalism, the kind of place where every customer was valued and every employee had a voice. Martha thrived in her new role. She worked tirelessly, absorbing everything she could from Elizabeth, learning how to run operations with compassion and precision. And one day, as they sat reviewing quarterly reports, Elizabeth looked up and said, "You've done well. The manager position is yours, permanently." Martha blinked back tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Elizabeth replied. Time moved forward, but the memory of that day, of being kicked out and walking back in with ownership, never faded. Elizabeth didn't tell the story often. She didn't need to. The dealership itself was the story now, a symbol of what happens when courage meets integrity, when dignity isn't just defended but honored. She had walked in that first day hoping to buy a car. She walked out with so much more, because sometimes the real reward isn't what you buy, it's what you build. The air inside the dealership had shifted entirely. Moments ago, the room was tense with humiliation and whispers. Now, it was thick with disbelief, reflection, and a silence so complete that it echoed louder than words ever could. As Rick and Tom were escorted out, two men who had once owned the floor with arrogance and false authority, there was no applause, no celebration, just stunned silence, the kind that follows a long overdue reckoning. Employees stood still, some with their eyes downcast, others still processing what had just happened. These were people who had worked under the reign of fear, who had learned to navigate a workplace where appearance mattered more than principle, where profit shadowed character. And now, the unthinkable had happened. The same woman they had watched be dismissed, turned away, and humiliated had returned with power, with grace, and with the undeniable strength of justice behind her. In the corner, a few of the high-end clientele watched with confusion and curiosity. Just earlier, they too had judged Elizabeth Johnson by what she wore, how she looked, how quietly she entered the space. And now they found themselves revising everything they had assumed. Her name was being whispered between them, not as a question, but with awe. Mrs. Johnson. The name was already carrying weight. Elizabeth didn't bask in the moment. She didn't look around to measure the effect of her presence. Instead, she walked slowly toward the car that had brought her here in the first place. A sleek silver S-Class parked elegantly beneath the brightest lights, its surface flawless and gleaming like a promise kept. She approached it with the same calm and quiet she'd maintained since the very beginning, reaching out one hand to glide gently across the hood. Her fingers lingered for just a second. It wasn't about the car. It never had been. But it was a symbol, a quiet nod to the dreams of her younger self, to the girl who used to flip through magazines and imagine a life where success didn't have to come with explanation, to the woman who had built something real and vast from nothing but her will, and who still, even now, was told she didn't look the part. Behind her, the board members remained, watching her with newfound respect. One of them stepped forward. He was older, his grey suit sharp, voice low and careful. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "on behalf of the company, we deeply apologize. This should never have happened. We'll be implementing new policies, stronger diversity training, and mandatory sensitivity workshops across all locations. We want to do better. We will do better." Elizabeth turned, meeting his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, just clarity. Her response was measured, but every word struck like a gavel. Good, she said, because respect isn't a privilege, it's a right. The words landed like truth laid bare. The board member nodded solemnly and stepped back. Elizabeth opened the car door. The scent of new leather rose gently to meet her, familiar and grounding. She eased into the driver's seat, letting her hands rest on the steering wheel. The engine purred to life with a soft, dignified growl, a sound she had long imagined, now realized not as a gift from someone else, but as a reward earned through strength and self-respect. As she pulled away from the dealership, she didn't look at the shrinking building in her rearview mirror. Her eyes met her own reflection instead, and in that small, quiet moment, something deeper settled within her. This wasn't about a car, it never was. This was about being seen, about being acknowledged in a world that too often looked away, about standing tall when every voice tried to shrink you down, about showing what happens when you walk through doors meant to keep you out, and turn them into entrances for others behind you. She had been dismissed not because she lacked wealth or status or achievement, but because of assumptions built into the bones of places like that showroom. And she had challenged those assumptions not with rage or vengeance, but with truth, with grace, and with unshakable certainty. She had walked out once with her dignity intact. Now, she drove away with something even greater. Back inside, Martha stood where Elizabeth had left her, holding the keys to the new chapter she'd been entrusted with. Other employees slowly returned to their work, but nothing felt the same. The hierarchy had cracked. The illusion had shattered. In its place stood the possibility of something better, a place where decency wasn't optional, where humility and humanity were woven into the fabric of success. Customers returned too, some to browse, others just to witness the transformation. Word spread quickly, stories circulated across social media and industry networks. The dealership became something of a legend, a case study in what happens when prejudice meets power and loses. And Elizabeth? She didn't return to the dealership often. She didn't need to. She trusted the new leadership. She had put the right people in place and given them the tools to lead with integrity. Her time, after all, was precious and better spent elsewhere. But occasionally, from time to time, she would drive past. And when she did, she'd smile. Not because of the car, but because of the change it represented. In the months that followed, the company's headquarters reached out to her more frequently. Her perspective was sought in board meetings. Her experience shaped new policies. Diversity and inclusion were no longer footnotes in the company's mission, but central pillars reinforced by actionable change. One day she was asked to speak at a national leadership summit. Executives from across industries sat in rows, eyes fixed on the stage as she stepped into the spotlight. She didn't bring slides or statistics. She brought her story. And when she told it, about the time she walked into a dealership hoping to buy a car only to be dismissed and disrespected, no one looked away. When she shared how she walked out and decided to own what tried to reject her, the room didn't applaud immediately. They sat in stunned silence, humbled by the rawness, the truth, the unwavering certainty in her voice. She didn't end with anger, she ended with a question. How many doors have we closed without realizing who we were shutting out? And how many legacies are we blind to because we're too focused on appearances to see the strength that stands before us? It was a question that lingered long after the stage lights dimmed. Back at her home, nestled in a quiet neighborhood far from the noise of industry, Elizabeth returned to the life she had built brick by brick. A place filled with warmth, with family photos and quiet mornings. She was content, but never complacent. She continued to mentor young entrepreneurs, many of whom reminded her of herself. People with big dreams and quiet power, still learning how to walk into rooms that weren't built for them. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, she'd take the S-Class out for a drive. Just her and the open road, no destination, just motion, just peace. She'd pass storefronts and gas stations, parks and city blocks, always keeping one hand lightly on the wheel and the other close to her heart. Not because of sentimentality, but because she understood something most people didn't. The greatest victories don't come from proving others wrong. They come from proving yourself right, quietly, defiantly, and completely. This wasn't just about a car. It was about reclaiming your place, about rewriting the story others try to write for you. About standing tall, not because the world says you should, but because you know you must. And in doing so, leaving behind something greater than wheels and keys and ownership. A legacy, a reminder, a roadmap for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong, because they do. And when they know it deeply enough, nothing, no gate, no glare, no insult, can keep them out. Elizabeth Johnson didn't change the world in one afternoon. She simply changed one place. But from that place, the message traveled far. Respect is not earned by wealth. It is extended because it's right. Dignity is not granted by others. It is claimed from within. And justice is not about punishment. It is about restoration. And that day, in the soft hum of an engine, with a mirror full of reflection and a road full of possibility, justice had finally arrived. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.